when I look into the future, one of the things that I really gets me excited about AI is agentic AI. Because we have talked in the past about infrastructure, what is required, we touch on all the elements. Now you are up and running, you did your inferencing, well, you do the training, then the inferencing, and now agentic AI. What is agentic AI? And a way to think of it to me is very simple, right? I explain this to my children or friends, is, think of agentic AI of a colleague that works for you and that you can ask them questions, right? A very simple example in the consumer side. Recently we are looking at, we have an event coming up and we wanted to have some t-shirts. So somebody who is graphically designed, have a good taste to design stuff, came up with a design. And I said, well, maybe we can do it better, right? We're gonna be in this city, we're gonna have this theme. I put all of that in one of the large language models and come back with a design. It was impressive. So this makes you wonder, right? And this is a very simple example. It makes you wonder, right, how many of the things we do today. And I look at that on my own team in strategy operations. A lot of the work we do probably will be able to be done with an agent, right? Somebody that you ask is somebody virtually, obviously it's not a person, that can actually give you something that is as good and sometimes even better and faster than what traditionally we have done. And that poses a lot of questions, right? Ethical questions, job evolution, how are we humans gonna deal with that? So that's one of the areas that to me feels much more interesting. And when you extrapolate that to the enterprise world, now imagine an enterprise that instead of having many of us, has many of these agents working and less humans. Could that be your next competitor? Will they be better than current enterprises? Is there a pathway in between that makes sense? That that's an area that I think is going to be super interesting in the next 5-10 years.
So maybe on that topic, can you tell us a little bit more about how do you see the businesses are going to change the way that they compete with each other now that they have access to this agentic AI and they're going to be developing more and adopting more of that into their business?
So again, as I was saying, I think some of what your statements you see there are a bit exaggerated, right? Like, if you don't use AI, somebody who uses AI is gonna kill you, stuff like that, or it's gonna take your job. Remember, we are at the beginning, just like with the internet, we are in the beginning. These things take years. And one of the things we see today is that even with the best models, the accuracy, the trust, where did they get the data? How did they extract a conclusion? It's not there. Having said that, all of that will be improved over time, no doubt about it. So you can imagine a situation where more companies are beginning to look at job functions or tasks or workflows that could be actually automated, right? Again, Cisco, looking on my own team, one of the things we do every week is we have predictive models. We look at where we may end up in our quarter, what areas have risk, what areas have opportunity, all of that. We do have already AI models to do that for us, but still a human is looking into the data and extract the conclusions, right? So yes, we have a gap in this place, or we have an opportunity in that place. In the future, an agent, in fact, we already are testing one, will tell you that, will tell you the conclusion. And that means you say, well, what happens to your job, Nando, right? You're over. I said, well, somebody still has to figure out what do we do next. Now, agentic AI may eventually also get there, right? But the more that you come to creativity, things that are more human, the harder it will be for the machine to get there. Not impossible, not that it will not look like, but it will not be as good as somebody making that final call. As an example, on these models we've been running them for 5 years. We have tons of data. Our predictability is extremely high. Now, at the beginning of the quarter, maybe 95%, right? So this, you will say, that's amazing. You can predict at the beginning of the quarter where you're gonna end up at the end of the quarter. But what this doesn't tell you is that 5% remaining is super important. You can imagine going to Wall Street, well, I'm gonna make my numbers, but maybe 5% over or 5% low. Nobody will do that. You have to commit to a number. That's where the humans come in. And they understand actually where also the weaknesses of the models are, because the data may not be as accurate, not be as abundant. So I do think there's a role in between the two of them to be together. But at the same time, I also think that if you don't embrace these technologies, somebody is going to be faster than you. The cycle of the business accelerates with this technology. So if you don't take advantage of it, you're going to have a competitor that can make a decision faster than you. And that's when you eventually will have problems if you don't adopt the technology. And this is why at Cisco we are so adamant to all of us, right? Even if it means rewriting our jobs, we gotta do this because we want to stay obviously in the lead.
So I just wonder, how will leaders manage the trust issues both internally and externally when it comes to implementing agentic AI?
So many of the models right now, the general models, they are beginning to show the sources now, which they didn't, well, not, I'm saying now, I say obviously for the last maybe half a year. But if you look 2 years back, many of the models didn't show you where the information came with. So that helps, right? You see something, a recommendation, and then you want to see where did that come from. That's a starting point. That's self-regulated by many of the language models that we have today. When you go into the models that are more verticalized or sovereign, you will need to have the same kind of understanding. You must understand how the model came to that conclusion, that suggestion. Otherwise, the trust will not be there. I think it was 3 years ago, I was in a conference in Mumbai, and I was talking about how Cisco was using AI for our own purpose, right? Before it was becoming super hype. I did most of my talking points based on what I could find on generally available models, large language models. You will be surprised how good it was. 85% of my content was already based on models. Now 15% I had to add. But the most important part was that there was an element I was looking at specifically. This was post-COVID. We had a lot of supply chain, and the world was suffering a supply chain constraints. So I was asking what kind of backlogs are being held by companies? And the answer was so wrong, but was so confidently wrong. Like well explained and all detail, just not sound right to me. It was an order of magnitude wrong, right? So sufficiently for somebody that actually knows about it can catch it. But it let me wonder, if you don't really know about the subject, how often you're gonna get something sent to you that you will know and you cannot tell. So all these things are gonna be critical for all of us, the companies, but also public sector governments to figure it out. Otherwise, if you don't have trust, and we were talking before about trust before, security trust, this thing will not work. I am confident it will be addressed, but I think we need to continuously remind ourselves that this is a must, something that has to be addressed collectively.
Realistically, how close are we to getting to autonomous enterprises?
I will say not very close, and I'm trying to be realistic, right? Because what you're going to see is for having an autonomous enterprise is basically that every single function has been moved into AI, right? And we are still beginning on the AI transition. What you're likely to see is that many enterprises would look, and at Cisco we do the same, is what elements of your business are the ones that are critical, that give you a competitive advantage. So at Cisco, for example, supply chain. Many other companies, supply chain is very important. So if you want to have those move to AI or enhanced or augmented by AI as soon as possible. Completely autonomous, unlikely. It will take years. Also, AI will learn on its own, right, for the many more years. And if you look at the internet as an example, the reason I said that is because how many companies really completely disappear because there was an e-business being created? A few. In e-commerce, we've seen that, but we still can go to the main street and see many of the malls still there. They just evolve, they change, right? I think something likely is going to happen. This gives us time to think about it, but if I was in the shoes of many of my friends in multinationals, I would be thinking, what area really I'm good at that could really become even better with AI? And then if you do that a few more times, eventually you will become probably not completely autonomous, but surely very much stronger in your competitive position than you were before. In some areas, you may have full autonomous enterprises. In banking, for example, we've seen for the last 15, 20 years, the rise of the almost no assets, no branches banks, online banks, very common. Probably many of you have one of those, I don't know. It's very common, but also you probably have also some of your assets in another bank that has physical assets, right? This is still, we're still humans, and oftentimes you want to still see it and feel it before you feel ready to completely give up. You're gonna see it happening. It's gonna happen by functions. Call centers, for example, they are very prone to be augmented first with AI, and eventually AI agents taking the work of many humans today. That's very possible. So every industry, every vertical will have a different propensity to be displaced by AI. But overall, don't expect this to happen in the next 2-3 years. But think about it now so that you can prepare for when maybe somebody does it, but ideally you will be the first one to make your operations as efficient as possible through AI.
Finally, what are some practical guardrails companies should put in place to manage this agentic AI transformation?
Secure your data. I will not even try anything on AI unless you have first secure your data. I mentioned also about the connectivity fast. Your models are not going to work well if you have slow connections or high latency, right? And again, if you don't know what the problems are, visibility, we were talking before. So those to me are the foundations of anything, right? But the most important one in this case, and your question will be the secure your data. Your data is your most valuable asset and it's yours, right? And that gives you also a competitive advantage. If you use the right models, you can you have visibility, you may know what's the best action next, but it's because you have that data. When you combine that data with some external data sensors, then strategically you have a superior position, right, over somebody that doesn't. But the starting point is secure it, right? So have policies on how you manage your data and how you secure it, what employees do, and how we actually restrictions you have on access, what you can use or not, but also then the technical element of that to ensure that the data is always secure and protected.